Dr. Elijah Washington stared at the termination letter in disbelief. Racial discrimination and endangerment of passenger safety, it read. Just 24 hours ago, he'd been blocked from saving Richard Bennett's life on United Airlines Flight 2187. Now the flight attendant was fired, but Richard was dead. Before we dive into this shocking story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment in emergency situations. Now let's uncover how a routine flight turned into a life-or-death struggle against prejudice. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Dr. Elijah Washington's Baltimore apartment as he double-checked his luggage. The Johns Hopkins cardiologist had packed his presentation materials carefully for the medical conference in San Francisco. At 42, Elijah had established himself as one of the country's leading experts in interventional cardiology, but the journey to his position had been anything but easy. His phone chimed with an incoming video call. Elijah smiled when he saw his daughter Zara's name flash across the screen. "Hey Dad. Just wanted to wish you good luck on your presentation," Zara beamed from her dorm room at Howard University. "Thanks, sweetheart. How's the pre-med life treating you?" Elijah asked, pride evident in his voice. "Organic chemistry is kicking my butt, but I'll survive. You know what keeps me going? Thinking about how you did this while dealing with way more obstacles than I have." Elijah nodded, remembering his childhood in rural Mississippi. As the son of a factory worker and a nurse's aide, his dream of becoming a doctor had seemed impossible to many in his hometown. He could still hear Mr. Davidson, his high school guidance counselor, suggesting he set more realistic goals when Elijah expressed interest in medical school applications. "Just remember what I always tell you," Elijah said to Zara. "You'll have to work twice as hard to get half as far, but that just means you'll be twice as good." "I know, Dad. Oh, and Grandma called yesterday. She wants you to bring back some sourdough bread from San Francisco." Elijah laughed. "Tell her I'll do my best. Love you, kiddo." "Love you too, Dad. Safe travels." 3 hours later, Elijah settled into his first-class seat on United Airlines Flight 2187. The upgrade had been a pleasant surprise, courtesy of his frequent flyer status. As he stowed his carry-on in the overhead compartment, he noticed a few passengers giving him curious glances. He was used to it, the subtle looks of surprise when people saw a black man in first class. "Good morning, sir," said the head flight attendant, a blonde woman whose name tag read, Brittany Miller. Her smile seemed professional and welcoming as she offered him a pre-flight beverage. "Water would be great, thank you," Elijah replied, returning her smile. As passengers continued boarding, a well-dressed older white man in an expensive suit approached the seat beside Elijah's. "Looks like we're neighbors for the next 5 hours," the man said, extending his hand. "Richard Bennett." "Elijah Washington," he responded, shaking Richard's hand. "So, what takes you to San Francisco, Elijah? Visiting family?" "Actually, I'm speaking at a medical conference. I'm a cardiologist at Johns Hopkins." Richard's eyebrows raised slightly. "A cardiologist? Impressive. You know, my family doctor is a cardiologist too. Dr. Silverstein. Perhaps you know him." "The medical community is pretty large, but the name doesn't ring a bell," Elijah responded politely, used to this kind of assumption that all black professionals must be familiar with their white counterparts. "Well, you seem young to be a cardiologist," Richard continued. "You must be one of those affirmative action success stories we hear about." Elijah took a deep breath, choosing to respond with facts rather than emotion. "Actually, I graduated top of my class at Harvard Medical School and completed my residency at Massachusetts General Hospital." "Oh, Harvard. Well, that explains it," Richard said with a nod, seemingly impressed but still managing to sound condescending. Elijah turned his attention to his tablet, opening the presentation he'd be delivering in San Francisco. His research on disparities in cardiac care outcomes among minority populations had gained significant attention in the medical community, and this conference would allow him to share his findings with colleagues from around the world. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the air, Elijah tried to focus on reviewing his slides rather than dwelling on Richard's comments. After all, changing hearts and minds was part of his life's work, both in medicine and in navigating a world still plagued by prejudice. 2 hours into the flight, Elijah was immersed in his presentation notes when a subtle movement caught his attention. Richard Bennett was dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief, his complexion noticeably paler than it had been during takeoff. The businessman loosened his tie and shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Elijah's medical instincts immediately kicked in. The symptoms were subtle but concerning: diaphoresis, pallor, and apparent discomfort. As a cardiologist, he'd seen these early warning signs countless times. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Bennett?" Elijah asked quietly. Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Just a bit of indigestion. Airplane food never agrees with me. Have you eaten anything on the flight?" "No, but I had a rather heavy breakfast at the airport." "Don't worry about me, I'm fine." Elijah nodded, respecting Richard's privacy while mentally noting the symptoms. He casually glanced at Richard's fingernails, noting a slight bluish tint, another potential warning sign of reduced oxygen. The interaction triggered a painful memory from Elijah's youth. His father, Joseph Washington, had experienced similar symptoms one summer afternoon. When they'd gone to the town's only clinic, the white doctor had made them wait while seeing other patients who had arrived later. By the time his father was examined, what could have been a treatable cardiac event had progressed too far. Joseph Washington died that evening, a victim not just of heart disease but of systemic racism in healthcare. This memory was partly what had driven Elijah to become a doctor, and it made him hypervigilant now as he observed Richard's worsening condition. 10 minutes later, Richard's breathing became more labored, and he'd unconsciously begun rubbing his left arm. Elijah pressed the call button. When Brittany Miller approached, her professional smile was firmly in place. "How can I help you, sir? Could we get some water, please? I think Mr. Bennett isn't feeling well." Brittany looked at Richard with concern. "Are you all right, sir? Can I get you anything else?" Richard began to respond but seemed short of breath. "Just, water is fine. I'm a cardiologist," Elijah added. "And I'm a bit concerned about his symptoms." Something in Brittany's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of doubt that Elijah had seen countless times before when he identified himself as a physician. "You're a doctor?" she asked, her tone carrying a hint of skepticism. "Yes, I specialize in interventional cardiology at Johns Hopkins." "I see," she replied, her smile tightening. "I'll get that water right away." As Brittany walked away, Elijah noticed Richard's breathing growing more labored. The businessman had stopped trying to hide his discomfort and was now clutching the armrest with white knuckles. "Mr. Bennett, I really think you might be experiencing cardiac distress. These symptoms shouldn't be ignored." "It's just heartburn," Richard insisted between shallow breaths. "I'd feel better if we could check your pulse and perhaps have the flight crew bring the emergency medical kit, just as a precaution." Richard didn't respond this time, his face contorting with what appeared to be increasing pain. Elijah pressed the call button again, this time holding it down for several seconds to signal urgency. Brittany returned with a cup of water but no medical kit. Richard took the cup with a shaking hand but couldn't seem to bring it to his lips. "Ma'am," Elijah said firmly, "I believe Mr. Bennett may be experiencing a cardiac event. Could you please bring the emergency medical kit? Time is critical in these situations." Brittany looked at Richard, then back at Elijah. "Sir, I'll need to check with the captain about protocol for medical emergencies." "This is standard procedure," Elijah explained, maintaining his professional demeanor despite growing concern. "All commercial flights carry emergency medical kits, and as a physician, I'm authorized to use it." "I understand, sir, but I need to verify." Before she could finish, Richard let out a pained gasp and slumped in his seat. "He's having a heart attack," Elijah announced, immediately unbuckling his seatbelt and leaning over to assist Richard, who had collapsed against the window. "I need that medical kit now." The surrounding passengers turned in their seats, alarmed by the commotion. Richard's face had turned ashen, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead. His breathing came in short, irregular gasps. "Sir, please remain calm," Brittany said, her voice rising slightly. "I need to follow proper protocols." "I am calm," Elijah replied evenly, though his heart raced with urgency. "I'm a board-certified cardiologist, and this man needs immediate medical attention. Every minute counts in a cardiac event." Elijah quickly assessed Richard's condition, checking his carotid pulse and finding it rapid and irregular. He loosened Richard's tie and collar, placing him in a position to maximize oxygen flow. "His pulse is irregular and rapid. I need to know if he has any medical history or is on any medications," Elijah said, addressing both Brittany and the surrounding passengers in case anyone knew Richard personally. A second flight attendant arrived at the scene, a tall black man whose name tag read Marcus Taylor. He took in the situation with a quick, professional glance. "What's happening?" Marcus asked. "Possible myocardial infarction," Elijah explained, using the medical term for a heart attack. "I'm Dr. Elijah Washington, cardiologist at Johns Hopkins. We need the emergency medical kit immediately, an AED if available, and I need to know if there's a way to contact medical support from the ground." Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I'll get the kit right away, doctor." As Marcus hurried toward the front of the plane, Brittany remained standing in the aisle, appearing flustered. "Sir, I need to verify your credentials before I can allow you to administer medical care on this flight." "There's no time for that," Elijah said firmly, continuing to monitor Richard's vital signs. "His condition is deteriorating rapidly." Passengers in nearby seats had begun filming the interaction on their phones. A middle-aged woman across the aisle spoke up. "He said he's a doctor." "What are you waiting for?" Brittany turned to the woman. "Ma'am, please stay out of this. We have procedures to follow." Elijah felt a flash of frustration but kept his focus on Richard, whose lips were now taking on a bluish tint, cyanosis, a sign of insufficient oxygen. He'd experienced this kind of skepticism throughout his career, being questioned in hospital corridors despite wearing his white coat and ID badge, security being called when he entered the doctor's lounge in a hospital where he was the attending physician, patients requesting the real doctor when he entered their rooms. But never had the stakes been so immediate, so life-threatening. "His oxygen saturation is dropping," Elijah announced, judging from Richard's coloration and breathing. "We need to start oxygen and possibly administer nitroglycerin if it's in your kit." Marcus returned, slightly out of breath, carrying the emergency medical kit. "Here, doctor," he said, handing it to Elijah. "Thank you," Elijah said, quickly opening the kit and assessing its contents. It contained basic emergency supplies, a stethoscope, blood pressure cuff, airways, and some emergency medications. Brittany stepped between Elijah and Marcus. "I've informed the captain of the situation. He's asking for verification of medical credentials before we proceed with treatment." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Brittany, this looks serious." "We have protocols, Marcus," she interrupted sharply. "The captain needs to know who's providing medical care." Elijah continued his assessment, placing the stethoscope from the kit on Richard's chest. "I can hear crackles in his lungs," he reported. "This is consistent with pulmonary edema secondary to left ventricular failure. He needs treatment now." As Elijah reached for the emergency medications in the kit, Brittany moved closer. "Sir, I cannot allow you to administer any medications until we've verified. My medical license number is 927-6843, Elijah said rapidly, not taking his eyes off Richard. "You can verify it with the Maryland Board of Physicians. Now please, this man needs help immediately." The captain's voice came over the intercom, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a medical situation on board. If there are any medical professionals among the passengers, please identify yourself to our flight crew." Elijah looked up at Brittany in disbelief. "I've been identifying myself as a physician for the past 5 minutes." "Sir, we need to be certain." "What exactly do you need to be certain of?" Elijah asked, his professional composure still intact but strain evident in his voice. "Would you be questioning my credentials if I looked different?" The tension in the first-class cabin was palpable as Richard Bennett's condition continued to deteriorate before everyone's eyes. Dr. Elijah Washington maintained his focus on the patient while Brittany Miller stood firmly between him and the medical supplies he desperately needed to administer. "Sir, I understand you're concerned, but I have to follow airline procedures," Brittany insisted, her arms crossed defensively. "And what procedures specifically require you to delay emergency medical care when a passenger is clearly in distress?" Elijah countered, his voice steady but urgent. "Every second counts in a cardiac event." Marcus Taylor, the second flight attendant, shifted uncomfortably beside them. "Brittany, maybe we should." "Stay out of this, Marcus," she snapped. "I'm the head flight attendant on this aircraft." Elijah reached for the nitroglycerin in the medical kit. "Mr. Bennett needs this medication now. It will help dilate his blood vessels and increase blood flow to his heart." Brittany physically moved to block his access. "Sir, step back. You are not authorized to administer medication on this flight." The confrontation had drawn the attention of nearly everyone in the cabin. Several passengers had their phones out, recording the increasingly tense situation. Elijah was acutely aware of how this might appear, a black man being forceful, even though his only goal was saving a life. "Ma'am," Elijah said, drawing on every ounce of his professional training to remain calm, "I took an oath to do no harm. Right now, the greatest harm is coming from delay. This man is dying." Richard's breathing had become increasingly labored, and his skin had taken on a grayish hue, a critical sign that Elijah recognized all too well from his years in emergency cardiology. A white woman in her mid-30s made her way up the aisle from economy class. "Excuse me, I'm a nurse. Is there something I can help with?" Brittany's demeanor changed instantly. "Oh, thank goodness. Yes, we have a passenger experiencing a medical emergency. This is Dr. Washington," Marcus quickly explained to the newcomer. "He's a cardiologist who's been trying to help." The nurse, whose name badge read Amanda Peterson, looked at Elijah with immediate recognition. "Dr. Washington. I attended your lecture on interventional techniques at the AHA conference last year. It's an honor to meet you, though I wish under better circumstances." Elijah nodded gratefully. "Nurse Peterson, I believe Mr. Bennett is experiencing an acute myocardial infarction. I need to administer nitroglycerin and monitor his vitals, but I've been prevented from accessing the medical supplies." Amanda turned to Brittany with a look of disbelief. "This is Dr. Elijah Washington. He's one of the top cardiologists in the country." Brittany's expression flickered with uncertainty, but she maintained her stance. "I still need proper verification before." "There's no time," both Elijah and Amanda said simultaneously. After a moment of tense silence, Brittany reluctantly stepped aside. "Fine, but I'll be watching everything you do." "Thank you," Elijah said, immediately returning his full attention to Richard. He and Amanda worked quickly, establishing an airway and preparing to administer the nitroglycerin. "Blood pressure's dropping," Amanda reported after wrapping the cuff around Richard's arm. Elijah nodded grimly. "I was afraid of that. This is progressing to cardiogenic shock." He turned to Marcus. "Please inform the captain that we need to divert to the nearest airport with medical facilities. This patient needs a catheterization lab immediately." As they worked to stabilize Richard, Elijah couldn't help but reflect on the bitter irony of the situation. Even in a life-or-death emergency, racial bias had nearly prevented him from providing care. How many lives had been lost due to similar prejudices throughout history? How many qualified black medical professionals had been sidelined when they were needed most? Richard's eyes fluttered open momentarily, confusion evident in his gaze as he looked at Elijah. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Dr. Washington. You're experiencing a serious cardiac event. We're doing everything we can to help you, and the plane is being diverted so you can get to a hospital. Try to stay calm and breathe as normally as possible." Richard managed a weak nod before his eyes closed again. The brief moment of consciousness was a positive sign, but Elijah knew they weren't out of the woods, not by a long shot. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a medical emergency, we will be making an unscheduled landing at Chicago O'Hare International Airport in approximately 20 minutes. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened." Brittany hovered nearby, still watching Elijah's every move with suspicious eyes. "The captain wants to know the patient's status," she said stiffly. "Critical but stable for now," Elijah replied, not looking up from his work. "Please ensure there's an advanced life support team waiting at the gate when we land." What would you do if you were in Dr. Washington's position? Would you have remained as composed as he did while facing such blatant discrimination during a life-or-death situation? Comment number 1 if you believe Brittany should face consequences for her actions. Comment number 2 if you think the airline's protocols need serious revision. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you believe medical professionals should be respected regardless of their race. Now, as the plane begins its emergency descent to Chicago, what do you think awaits Dr. Washington and Richard Bennett on the ground? Will Richard survive this ordeal, and will justice be served for the discrimination that nearly cost him his life? Let's find out in the next part of this shocking true story. As Flight 2187 began its rapid descent toward Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the cabin crew prepared for landing while Dr. Elijah Washington and Nurse Amanda Peterson continued their desperate efforts to stabilize Richard Bennett. The first-class cabin had been transformed into a makeshift emergency room, with medical supplies strewn across empty seats and anxious passengers looking on. "His oxygen saturation is still dropping," Amanda reported, checking the portable pulse oximeter from the medical kit. "Down to 86%. Elijah nodded grimly. "We need to get him on high-flow oxygen as soon as we land. The nitroglycerin has helped, but his coronary arteries are severely occluded." Despite Brittany Miller's initial obstruction, she now stood at the periphery, occasionally relaying information to the cockpit but otherwise staying out of the medical professional's way. Marcus Taylor, meanwhile, had proven invaluable, fetching additional supplies and helping to keep other passengers calm and informed. "How much longer until we land?" Elijah asked Marcus as he rechecked Richard's pulse. "Captain says 8 minutes," Marcus replied. "Emergency services are standing by at the gate." Elijah performed another quick assessment of Richard's condition. The businessman's skin remained ashen, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. The electrocardiogram function on the emergency medical kit, while basic compared to hospital equipment, showed clear signs of ST segment elevation, confirming Elijah's diagnosis of a STEMI heart attack. "We're doing everything we can, Mr. Bennett," Elijah said, unsure if Richard could hear him in his semi-conscious state. "Just stay with us a little longer." Amanda adjusted the makeshift oxygen delivery system they'd assembled. "It's remarkable you were seated right next to him," she said quietly to Elijah. "Most passengers in his condition wouldn't have had a cardiologist right at hand." "Remarkable but nearly irrelevant if I hadn't been allowed to help," Elijah replied, keeping his voice low. "If you hadn't come forward to vouch for me." He didn't need to finish the thought. Both medical professionals understood the grim reality: racial bias in healthcare wasn't just an academic concern or a statistical anomaly. It was literally a matter of life and death. As if reading his thoughts, Amanda shook her head. "I've seen it before. My husband is a black emergency physician. The stories he tells me about being questioned, second-guessed, or outright blocked from doing his job." Their conversation was interrupted when Richard suddenly gasped and arched his back, his body going rigid. "He's seizing," Elijah announced, immediately moving to protect Richard's airway. "Time." Amanda checked her watch. 43 seconds since onset. The seizure, a complication of decreased blood flow to the brain, lasted just over a minute before Richard's body relaxed. But the cardiac monitor now showed an even more dangerous rhythm. Ventricular tachycardia, Elijah said, his training kicking in automatically. We need the AED. Marcus quickly retrieved the automated external defibrillator stored in the cabin. Elijah and Amanda worked in sync, applying the pads to Richard's chest after cutting away his shirt. Stand clear, Elijah announced, making sure neither he nor Amanda was touching Richard or the seat. The AED delivered its shock, and for a heart-stopping moment, the monitor showed a flat line before Richard's heart rhythm stabilized into a more regular pattern. We've got sinus rhythm, Elijah reported, relief evident in his voice. But it's still too fast and irregular. Richard's eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear evident in his gaze. Mr. Bennett, you're on an airplane. You've had a heart attack, but we're taking care of you, Elijah explained calmly. We're about to land in Chicago, and there will be paramedics waiting to take you to a hospital. Recognition dawned in Richard's eyes as he focused on Elijah's face. You're the doctor, next to me, he managed to say, his voice barely audible. That's right. Try not to speak. Save your strength. Richard weakly reached for Elijah's hand. Thank you. Before Elijah could respond, the aircraft began its final approach, the increase in pressure causing Richard visible discomfort. His grip on Elijah's hand tightened, and his breathing became more labored. Hang on, Mr. Bennett, Elijah urged. Just a few more minutes. The landing, while smooth under the circumstances, jostled the makeshift medical setup. Elijah and Amanda worked quickly to secure Richard and the equipment as the plane taxied rapidly to the gate. Paramedics are boarding immediately, the captain announced over the intercom. All passengers please remain seated. True to the captain's word, within minutes of the aircraft reaching the gate, a team of paramedics rushed on board, equipped with a stretcher and advanced life support equipment. STEMI, mid-60s male, received nitroglycerin approximately 25 minutes ago, Elijah reported to the lead paramedic. Episode of VTACH successfully converted with AED about 7 minutes ago. Current heart rate 110, BP 90/60ths, oxygen saturation 87% on supplemental oxygen. The paramedic nodded, visibly impressed by the comprehensive handoff. You a doctor? Cardiologist, Elijah confirmed. Dr. Elijah Washington, Johns Hopkins. Well, Dr. Washington, you've given this gentleman his best chance. We'll take it from here. As the paramedics transferred Richard to their stretcher, he reached again for Elijah's hand. Don't leave, he whispered. Elijah looked at the paramedics questioningly. Sorry, Doc, the lead paramedic said. We need to move fast, and the hospital has limited access protocols due to COVID restrictions. Elijah nodded understanding and turned back to Richard. You're in excellent hands now, Mr. Bennett. They're taking you to Chicago Memorial. It's a top cardiac center. Richard's eyes, still clouded with pain and fear, locked onto Elijah's. In that moment, something passed between them, a human connection that transcended their earlier interaction, their different backgrounds, and the crisis that had brought them together. As the paramedics whisked Richard away, Elijah felt the adrenaline that had been sustaining him begin to ebb. He sat heavily in the nearest seat, suddenly aware of how physically and emotionally drained he felt. Amanda placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. You did everything possible, Dr. Washington. Everything. And yet it almost wasn't enough, he replied quietly. Not because of medical limitations, but because of prejudice, she finished for him. I know. And I've seen too much of it. As passengers began to disembark, airline officials boarded the plane. A woman in a United Airlines uniform approached Elijah. Dr. Washington. I'm Diane Reeves, Customer Service Director for United at O'Hare. Could I speak with you privately? Elijah stood, straightening his rumpled clothing. Of course. The captain has informed me of the situation, Diane began once they had moved to a quieter area of the now emptying plane. First, thank you for your assistance today. However, there's been a complaint filed regarding your behavior during the emergency. Elijah stared at her in disbelief. A complaint? About my behavior? Yes. Flight attendant Miller has reported that you were aggressive and failed to follow proper airline protocols during the medical emergency. Before Elijah could respond, Marcus stepped forward from where he had been assisting with passenger deplaning. Ms. Reeves, that's not what happened. Dr. Washington was professional throughout the entire situation. It was Brittany who. Thank you, Marcus, Diane interrupted. We'll be gathering statements from all involved parties. She turned back to Elijah. Dr. Washington, I regret to inform you that we'll need to place you on administrative hold while we investigate this incident. You won't be able to board your connecting flight to San Francisco today. Elijah felt a surge of anger but maintained his composure. I see. And what about Mr. Bennett? Is there any update on his condition? I'm not at liberty to share patient information, Diane replied stiffly. Of course, Elijah said, his tone carefully neutral. In that case, I'd like to make a statement for your investigation. As Elijah began recounting the events, he noticed several passengers lingering nearby, many with their phones still recording. The truth would come out, he just hoped it wouldn't be too late for Richard Bennett. The sterile fluorescent lights of O'Hare International Airport's administrative offices cast harsh shadows across Elijah's face as he concluded his statement to Diane Reeves and another United Airlines representative. For nearly an hour, he had meticulously detailed the events on Flight 2187, careful to stick to facts rather than emotions despite his growing frustration. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Washington? Asked Robert Chen, the airline's regional legal counsel who had been hastily called in. Only that while we're conducting this interview, Mr. Bennett is fighting for his life, Elijah replied, checking his watch. Time is muscle in cardiac events. The delay in treatment may have caused irreversible damage. Chen nodded, making a note on his tablet. We understand your concern for the passenger. Rest assured, United Airlines takes the medical safety of all passengers extremely seriously. Seriously enough to allow racial bias to interfere with emergency medical care? Elijah asked pointedly. Diane Reeves shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Dr. Washington, that's a serious allegation. Ms. Miller maintains she was following protocol for verifying medical credentials. I've provided my medical license, my Johns Hopkins ID, and contact information for the chief of cardiology at one of the nation's top hospitals, Elijah responded. Meanwhile, Nurse Peterson was allowed to assist immediately without any verification. What protocol explains that discrepancy? Before either airline representative could respond, there was a knock at the door. Marcus Taylor entered, still in his flight attendant uniform. I apologize for interrupting, he said, but I wanted to provide my statement before beginning my next shift. Chen glanced at his tablet. Mr. Taylor, we have you scheduled for an interview tomorrow morning. With all due respect, sir, I believe this matter requires immediate attention, Marcus replied firmly. What I witnessed today was unacceptable, and I cannot in good conscience continue my duties without addressing it. Elijah felt a surge of gratitude toward the young flight attendant. Standing up against workplace injustice, especially regarding racial bias, often came with significant professional risk. Very well, Chen said, gesturing to an empty chair. Please, join us. For the next 15 minutes, Marcus provided his account of the incident, corroborating Elijah's version of events and adding details about Brittany Miller's previous behavior toward passengers of color. This isn't an isolated incident, Marcus concluded. I've worked with Ms. Miller on 27 flights over the past year, and I've observed a pattern of differential treatment. As Marcus spoke, Elijah's phone vibrated with an incoming call. Seeing it was from Chicago Memorial Hospital, he excused himself to take it in the hallway. Dr. Washington speaking. Dr. Washington, this is Dr. Patel from Chicago Memorial's cardiac unit. I understand you provided initial treatment to Richard Bennett on United Flight 2187. Yes, that's correct. How is he? There was a heavy pause on the line. I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Bennett went into cardiogenic shock shortly after arrival. Despite our best efforts, we were unable to revive him. He was pronounced deceased at 1:47 p.m. Elijah closed his eyes, a wave of grief and anger washing over him. I see. Thank you for letting me know, Dr. Patel. For what it's worth, our team reviewed the records of care provided on the flight. Your interventions were textbook perfect. The delay in diverting the flight. Dr. Patel's voice trailed off. Well, in these cases, minutes matter. Yes, they do, Elijah replied, his voice barely above a whisper. After ending the call, Elijah leaned against the wall, taking a moment to compose himself before returning to the interview room. Richard Bennett was dead, a man who, despite his initial condescension, had thanked Elijah in what turned out to be his final conscious moments. When Elijah re-entered the room, the conversation halted. Mr. Bennett didn't make it, he announced, his professional demeanor intact despite the turmoil he felt inside. He died less than an hour ago. The airline representatives exchanged alarmed glances. Chen cleared his throat. Dr. Washington, we deeply regret. Regret doesn't bring him back, Elijah interrupted. A man is dead who might have lived if proper medical care hadn't been delayed due to racial profiling. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Diane Reeves spoke first. Dr. Washington, in light of this development, will need to conduct a more thorough investigation. In the meantime, I regret to inform you that you'll remain on administrative hold with United Airlines. Elijah looked at her incredulously. I'm still being prevented from continuing my travel. Despite multiple witnesses confirming my account. It's standard procedure during an active investigation involving passenger mortality, Chen explained, not meeting Elijah's eyes. Before Elijah could respond, the door opened again. A young woman with a United Airlines ID entered, carrying a tablet. Excuse me, Mr. Chen, Ms. Reeves, you need to see this urgently. She handed the tablet to Chen, who paled visibly as he watched whatever was on the screen. He passed it to Reeves, whose reaction mirrored his own. What is it? Elijah asked. Chen looked up, his expression grave. Videos of the incident have gone viral. Multiple passengers uploaded footage to social media. It's not portraying the airline favorably. As if on cue, Elijah's phone began buzzing with notifications. When he checked it, he saw dozens of missed calls, text messages, and email alerts. Among them was a message from his daughter Zara, Dad, are you okay? You're all over Twitter. Call me ASAP. Dar. Washington, Diane Reeves said, her tone suddenly much more conciliatory, perhaps we should continue this discussion after you've had a chance to rest. We can arrange accommodations for you here in Chicago and rebook your flight to San Francisco for tomorrow. Elijah shook his head. The conference begins tomorrow morning. I was scheduled to deliver the keynote address. We can arrange a first-class seat on the next available flight, she offered. That won't be necessary, came a new voice from the doorway. A man in an expensive suit stood there, flanked by an assistant. Dr. Washington won't be flying United again anytime soon, will you, Doctor? Regina, Elijah said, recognizing the assistant. I didn't expect to see you here. Regina Foster, a civil rights attorney Elijah had met through his work on healthcare disparities, stepped forward. When multiple former patients tag you in a viral video of a distinguished physician being racially profiled during a medical emergency, you take notice. Especially when that physician is your friend. She turned to the airline representatives. I'm Regina Foster, representing Dr. Washington. This meeting is over. Any further communications should be directed to my office. As they left the administrative offices, Regina's boss, William Thurgood of Thurgood and Associates Civil Rights Law, briefed Elijah on the rapidly developing situation. The videos have been viewed over 2 million times in the past hour. Hashtag Let Doctors Save Lives is trending nationwide. The American Medical Association has already issued a statement condemning the incident. Elijah felt overwhelmed. "I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to help a man in distress." "I know," Regina said gently. "But now you have an opportunity to help change a system that allows this kind of discrimination to persist." As they walked through the terminal, Elijah noticed people staring, some even taking pictures. His phone continued to buzz with notifications. "There's something else you should know," William said as they approached the exit. "Richard Bennett's family is trying to reach you. His son Thomas is here in Chicago now." Elijah stopped walking. "They're here now?" Regina nodded. "They want to meet with you, if you're willing." Elijah thought of the man who had sat beside him just hours ago, a man who had made casually prejudiced remarks and then, in his most vulnerable moment, had reached for Elijah's hand in gratitude and fear. "Yes," Elijah said. "I'd like to meet them." As they exited the terminal into the bright afternoon sun, Elijah realized that what had begun as a routine flight had transformed into something that would affect not only his life but potentially the lives of countless others who faced discrimination in medical settings. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders alongside his grief for Richard Bennett, a man he hadn't been allowed to save. "Dr. Washington, would you like to comment on what happened on Flight 2187? Is it true the flight attendant prevented you from saving a passenger's life? How do you respond to allegations that racial bias played a role in this tragedy?" The barrage of questions from reporters gathered outside Chicago Memorial Hospital forced Elijah to pause before entering the building. Regina Foster stepped slightly in front of him, addressing the press with practiced authority. "Dr. Washington will provide a statement at the appropriate time. For now, he's here to meet with the Bennett family and offer his condolences. We ask that you respect their privacy during this difficult moment." Inside the hospital, a staff member escorted them to a private waiting room where two people sat, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reddened eyes, and a man around 40 who bore a striking resemblance to Richard Bennett. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, this is Dr. Elijah Washington," the hospital liaison introduced them. Catherine Bennett rose shakily to her feet, supported by her son Thomas. For a moment, Elijah feared she might collapse, or worse, lash out at him for failing to save her husband. Instead, she took a step forward and embraced him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for trying to save Richard." The unexpected gratitude caught Elijah off guard. He returned the embrace gently before stepping back. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Bennett. I wish I could have done more." Thomas Bennett extended his hand. "The hospital staff told us everything you did to try to help my father. They said you fought to provide care despite." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "Please, sit down," Catherine said, gesturing to the chairs. "We have so many questions, if you don't mind." For the next hour, Elijah explained in layman's terms what had happened to Richard, answering the family's questions with compassion and clarity. He described the signs of cardiac distress he had observed, the interventions he had attempted, and the complications that had arisen. "So if you had been allowed to administer treatment immediately, would Richard have survived?" Catherine asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Elijah chose his words carefully. "In cardiac events, time is critical. Every minute of delay increases the risk of permanent damage or death. I can't say with absolute certainty that earlier intervention would have saved Mr. Bennett, but it would have significantly improved his chances." Thomas's jaw tightened. "And this delay occurred because the flight attendant didn't believe you were really a doctor?" "She said she was following protocol," Elijah replied diplomatically. "But she immediately accepted the white nurse who came forward," Thomas pressed, his anger evident. Elijah didn't respond immediately. He had spent his entire professional life navigating these waters carefully, aware that pointing out racial bias often led to being labeled as playing the race card or being too sensitive. Catherine Bennett reached over and took Elijah's hand. Dr. Washington, my husband could be old-fashioned in his views. I heard from another passenger that he made some inappropriate comments to you early in the flight. Mrs. Bennet, that's not important now, Elijah began. It is important, she insisted. Richard grew up in a different time, with different influences. But he was learning, changing. That's what makes this even more tragic. Thomas pulled out his phone. Dr. Washington, have you seen what's happening online? Elijah shook his head. Since entering the hospital, he had silenced his still buzzing phone. Thomas turned his screen toward Elijah, showing a Twitter feed filled with the hashtag #LetDoctorSaveLives. The video, captured by multiple passengers, had been viewed tens of millions of times in just a few hours. Medical professionals across the country were sharing their own experiences with racism in healthcare settings. Black doctors and nurses posted photos of themselves in scrubs and white coats with the hashtag, affirming their right to practice medicine without being questioned because of their skin color. It's become a movement, Thomas said. And people want to hear from you. Before Elijah could respond, his phone rang. Seeing it was Zara, he excused himself to take the call. Dad. Are you okay? I've been trying to reach you for hours. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just dealing with a lot right now. Everyone at Howard is talking about what happened. My classmates are organizing a demonstration in support of black medical professionals. Dad, you've become a symbol. Elijah sighed. He had never sought the spotlight, his passion was medicine, not activism. Yet he couldn't deny the potential impact of this moment. Zara, I need to call you back. I'm meeting with the passenger's family right now. Oh. I'm sorry. We're all proud of you, Dad. And I've started a thread on Twitter documenting similar incidents. The response has been overwhelming. After promising to call her later, Elijah returned to the Bennets. Catherine was looking at her own phone, her expression troubled. United Airlines just released a statement, she said, reading from the screen. We are deeply saddened by the loss of a valued customer and are investigating the circumstances surrounding this tragic incident. The safety and well-being of our passengers remain our highest priority. Nothing about what really happened. Thomas scoffed. Corporate damage control. Meanwhile, that flight attendant is giving interviews claiming she was just following protocol and felt intimidated by you. Elijah's phone chimed with a text message from Regina. Brittany Miller just went on Channel 7 News. We need to talk ASAP. The door to the waiting room opened, and a hospital administrator entered. Dr. Washington. I apologize for interrupting. The hospital board would like to speak with you. They're concerned about potential liability issues. Catherine Bennett stood up. Liability? This man tried to save my husband's life while your hospital was still miles away. If anyone should be concerned about liability, it's that airline and their racist employee. The administrator looked taken aback by the elderly woman's vehemence. Mrs. Bennet, I assure you. No, she interrupted. I've spent 63 years being polite when I should have spoken up. Not anymore. She turned to Elijah. Dr. Washington, my husband's company has considerable influence. The Bennett family stands with you, whatever you decide to do next. Thomas nodded in agreement. My father would have wanted us to make this right. Not just for him, but for everyone who might face this kind of discrimination in the future. As Elijah left the hospital that evening, the crowd of reporters had grown. Camera lights illuminated the darkening sky as he stepped outside with Regina Foster beside him. Dr. Washington. Will you be filing a lawsuit against United Airlines? Do you believe Richard Bennett would have survived if you had been allowed to treat him immediately? What do you say to Brittany Miller's claim that she was just following protocol? Elijah paused, considering his response carefully. The events of the past 24 hours had thrust him into a spotlight he never sought. Yet as a black physician who had navigated racial barriers throughout his career, he understood the significance of this moment, not just for himself, but for every medical professional of color who had been doubted, questioned, or blocked from doing their job because of their race. "I became a doctor to save lives," he said finally, his voice steady and clear. "Yesterday, I was prevented from doing that because of what I look like, not because of my qualifications." Richard Bennett deserved better. All patients deserve better. As reporters shouted follow-up questions, Regina guided him toward a waiting car. "That was perfect," she said quietly. "Dignified, truthful, and powerful." Inside the car, Elijah checked his phone again. Among the hundreds of notifications was an email from the medical conference organizers in San Francisco, offering to reschedule his keynote address via video conference. Another was from the chief of medicine at Johns Hopkins, expressing full support and offering administrative leave if needed. But the message that caught his attention most was from a Dr. Simone Carter, president of the National Medical Association, representing black physicians across the country. "Dr. Washington, what happened on that flight is all too familiar to many of us. But rarely has it been captured so clearly, with such devastating consequences. If you're willing, we would like to work with you to develop new protocols for medical emergencies, protocols that address implicit bias and ensure that all qualified medical professionals can provide care without obstruction. This could save countless lives." As the car pulled away from the hospital, Elijah realized that while he had failed to save one life, he now had an opportunity to save many more by addressing the systemic bias that had contributed to Richard Bennett's death. It wasn't a role he had ever envisioned for himself, but it was one he could no longer avoid. The conference room at Thurgood and Associates civil rights law firm hummed with tense energy as Elijah sat across from Regina Foster and her team of attorneys. 3 days had passed since the incident on Flight 2187, and the national conversation showed no signs of slowing down. "The airline wants to settle," Regina announced, sliding a document across the polished table. "They're offering a substantial sum and a public apology." Elijah glanced at the figure and shook his head. "This isn't about money for me." "I understand," Regina replied. "But it's important to know what they're putting on the table before we discuss our strategy." William Thurgood, the firm's senior partner, leaned forward. "Dr. Washington, United Airlines is in full crisis mode. Their stock has dropped 12% since the videos went viral. They're facing boycotts, and their competitors are already running ads emphasizing their own medical emergency protocols." "What about Brittany Miller?" Elijah asked. Regina exchanged glances with her colleagues. "She's been placed on administrative leave pending the airline's internal investigation. However, she's retained her own counsel and is portraying herself as a scapegoat for systemic problems within the airline industry." Elijah rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the past few days. He hadn't slept well since the incident, his dreams haunted by Richard Bennett's final moments. "Dr. Washington," said Nicole Chen, another attorney on the team, "there's something else you should know. We've been contacted by 7 other passengers from Flight 2187 who witnessed the incident. All of them are willing to provide statements confirming your account. And Marcus Taylor, the flight attendant who assisted you, has formally filed a complaint against Miller with the airline's HR department, documenting previous incidents of discriminatory behavior," added William. Elijah nodded, grateful for the support but still troubled. "What about Richard's family? How are they doing?" "They've retained separate counsel," Regina explained. "They're pursuing a wrongful death suit against the airline. Catherine Bennett called this morning. She was hoping you might be available to meet with them and their attorney tomorrow." "Of course," Elijah agreed immediately. The intercom on the conference table buzzed. "Dar. Washington, there's a call for you from Johns Hopkins. Dr. Abernathy says it's urgent." Excusing himself, Elijah took the call in a private office. Dr. James Abernathy, chief of cardiology at Johns Hopkins and Elijah's mentor since residency, got straight to the point. "Elijah, the hospital board met this morning. They want you to know they stand firmly behind you. Furthermore, they're establishing a new fellowship in your name focused on addressing racial disparities in cardiac care." Elijah was momentarily speechless. "James, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Your actions spoke loudly enough." Dr. Abernathy paused. "There's something else. The American College of Cardiology wants you to lead a task force developing new guidelines for in-flight medical emergencies. They believe your experience makes you uniquely qualified." By the time Elijah rejoined the legal team, he had received 3 more calls, one from the National Medical Association, another from the American Medical Association, and a third from the Association of Black Cardiologists. All offered support and sought his involvement in addressing the intersection of racial bias and medical care. "It seems you're in high demand, Dr. Washington," Regina observed as he settled back into his seat. "Apparently so," Elijah replied, still processing the rapid developments. "But there's only one meeting I'm truly concerned about right now." The following morning, Elijah arrived at the Bennett family home in Chicago's North Shore. Catherine greeted him warmly, leading him to a sunlit living room where Thomas waited with their attorney, Michael Goldstein. "Dr. Washington, thank you for coming," Goldstein began. "The Bennetts wanted to discuss their legal strategy with you before proceeding." Catherine took a seat beside Elijah on the sofa. "We've been following everything in the news. That flight attendant, Miller, she's been making all sorts of claims about feeling threatened by you." "Classic deflection tactic," Goldstein commented. "She's trying to leverage racial stereotypes to justify her actions." Thomas, who had been standing by the window, turned to face Elijah. "My father was complicated. Growing up, I heard him say things about people of color that made me uncomfortable. But in recent years, especially after I married Jasmine, my wife is Filipina, he'd been changing. Learning, trying to do better." "Thomas found something in Dad's belongings," Catherine said, her voice catching. "Show him, dear." Thomas handed Elijah a small leather-bound notebook. It was in his briefcase. The last entry was from the morning of the flight. Elijah carefully opened the journal to the marked page. Richard's handwriting was neat and precise. "Meeting with Dr. Reynolds today about my heart concerns. He insists I'm fine, but something doesn't feel right. Carol thinks I'm just anxious about retirement. Maybe. Flying to San Francisco today to see the grandkids. Thomas says I need to be more open-minded about his parenting choices. He's right. The world his children are growing up in is different from mine. Better in many ways. I need to adapt, not resist. Note to self, less judgment, more listening." Elijah closed the journal, deeply moved by this glimpse into Richard's inner thoughts. "He was trying," Catherine said softly. "That's why this feels so wrong. So unjust. In his final moments, he reached out to you for help, and that woman stopped you because of the color of your skin. Mrs. Bennett, Please, call me Catherine." "Catherine," Elijah amended, "I appreciate you sharing this with me. It helps to know who Richard really was, beyond our brief interaction on the flight." Michael Goldstein cleared his throat. "Dr. Washington, the Bennetts have made a decision about their lawsuit. They want to partner with you." "Partner?" "Yes," Thomas confirmed. "Rather than pursue separate legal actions, we want to join forces. Our goal isn't just financial compensation, though that matters. We want to effect real change in airline protocols and training. The Bennett Family Foundation is prepared to establish a substantial fund for racial equity in emergency medical response," Catherine added. "We'd like you to lead it, if you're willing." Elijah was stunned by the offer. "I'm honored, but my expertise is in cardiology, not nonprofit management." "You would have professional support," Goldstein assured him. "The foundation would hire the necessary staff. Your role would be to provide vision and medical expertise." As Elijah considered the proposal, his phone vibrated with an incoming email. It was from Regina Foster, marked urgent. Opening it, he found a link to a breaking news story: United Airlines terminates flight attendant following viral incident. The article included a statement from the airline's CEO. After a thorough investigation, United Airlines has terminated the employment of Brittany Miller for violation of company policies regarding racial discrimination and endangerment of passenger safety. We acknowledge the profound failing in our response to this medical emergency and are committed to ensuring such an incident never occurs again. Elijah showed the article to the others. It's a start, Thomas said. But one termination doesn't fix a broken system. No, Elijah agreed. It doesn't. Which is why I think your proposal has merit. Together, we might be able to create meaningful change that extends beyond this one incident. As they discussed the details of the potential partnership, Elijah felt a sense of purpose crystallizing within him. The tragedy of Richard Bennett's death had created an unexpected opportunity to address issues he had navigated throughout his career, issues that affected countless medical professionals of color and, by extension, the patients they served. Later that evening, as Elijah prepared for his video keynote address to the medical conference in San Francisco, he reflected on the surreal turns his life had taken in less than a week. What should have been a routine flight to present his research had become a catalyst for national conversation about race, medicine, and the life-or-death consequences of bias. His phone rang. It was Zara. "Dad, I just saw the news about the flight attendant being fired." "Yes, I just found out myself." "Is it enough?" she asked, echoing Thomas Bennett's sentiment. "No," Elijah replied honestly. "But it's a beginning. And I think your old man might have found a new calling alongside his cardiology practice." "The Bennett Foundation thing? It's all over Twitter already." Elijah laughed. "Nothing stays private for long these days, does it?" "Not when you're trending worldwide," Zara replied. "Dad, I'm so proud of you. Not just for what you tried to do on that flight, but for how you've handled everything since. You're showing us all how to turn tragedy into transformation." As he ended the call with his daughter, Elijah thought about Richard Bennett's journal entry, his commitment to less judgment and more listening. Perhaps that was the key to healing not just hearts, but the deeper divisions that had contributed to this tragedy. 6 months later, Elijah stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Lakefront Hotel, gazing out at the audience of over 500 medical professionals, airline representatives, and patient advocates. The inaugural conference of the Bennett Initiative for Equitable Emergency Response had drawn participants from across the country and beyond. "When I boarded Flight 2187 that day, I was simply a doctor traveling to a conference," Elijah began. "I had no idea that flight would change the trajectory of not only my life but the lives of so many others." In the front row, Catherine and Thomas Bennett sat alongside Zara, who had flown in from Howard University for the event. Marcus Taylor, now promoted to flight supervisor at United Airlines, was seated nearby, as was nurse Amanda Peterson, who had become a key advocate for the initiative. Richard Bennett's death was preventable, Elijah continued, his voice strong and clear. The delay in his treatment stemmed not from medical limitations, but from bias, a bias so deeply ingrained that it overrode common sense and human decency in a life-or-death situation. He paused, looking directly at Catherine, who gave him an encouraging nod. But rather than dwelling solely on what went wrong, the Bennett family chose to focus on what could be made right. Their generosity and vision have made this initiative possible, transforming personal tragedy into systemic change. Over the past 6 months, the Bennett Initiative had worked with major airlines to develop new protocols for medical emergencies. United Airlines, seeking to rebuild its reputation after the incident, had been the first to adopt the comprehensive program, followed quickly by Delta, American, and several international carriers. Today, I'm proud to announce that all major U.S. airlines have committed to implementing our evidence-based protocols for identifying and responding to in-flight medical emergencies, Elijah announced to applause. These protocols include specific measures to prevent bias from interfering with emergency care, standardized credential verification procedures, and improved training for flight crews. The legal battle had been resolved 3 months earlier, with United Airlines agreeing to a substantial settlement with both Elijah and the Bennett family. Most importantly, the settlement included binding commitments to policy changes and ongoing monitoring by an independent oversight committee. But our work extends beyond the airline industry, Elijah continued. The Bennett Initiative is now partnering with hospital systems nationwide to address similar barriers to emergency care in traditional medical settings. He gestured to a group of young people seated together near the back of the ballroom. I'd like to recognize the first cohort of Bennett scholars. 20 medical students from underrepresented backgrounds who will receive full funding for their education in exchange for commitments to work in underserved communities. The audience rose in a standing ovation as the students stood to be recognized. Among them was a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Thomas Bennett, Richard's grandson, Marcus, who had been inspired by his grandfather's story to pursue a career in emergency medicine. After the applause subsided, Elijah shifted to the more personal aspect of his address. 6 months ago, I failed to save Richard Bennett's life. That failure will always be with me. But through the Bennett family's courage and compassion, his legacy will now save countless others. Catherine Bennett wiped tears from her eyes as Elijah continued. I've spent my career as a cardiologist, focused on healing hearts in the physical sense. Now, alongside that work, I find myself engaged in healing a different kind of heart condition, one that affects our entire society. He shared how the incident had sparked a national conversation about racial bias in medical settings, leading to new research, training programs, and accountability measures across the healthcare system. The videos from Flight 2187 made visible what many of us have experienced throughout our careers: the doubting, the questioning, the barriers placed before qualified medical professionals because of their race. But that visibility has created an unprecedented opportunity for change. As Elijah concluded his address, he invited Catherine Bennett to join him at the podium. The elderly woman, who had become like family to him over the past months, embraced him warmly before turning to the microphone. My husband Richard was not a perfect man, she began, her voice wavering slightly. He had his prejudices, as many of us do. But in his final years, he was working to overcome them, to become better. In a cruel irony, it was bias that ultimately cut short his journey. She paused, gathering her composure. Yet I believe Richard would be proud of what has emerged from this tragedy. The Bennett Initiative represents what he was striving toward in his own life: growth, learning, and positive change. After the formal program concluded, Elijah mingled with attendees during the reception. A young black medical student approached him nervously. "Dr. Washington, your stand that day inspired me to continue in medicine when I was ready to quit. The discrimination I faced during my clinical rotations had me questioning whether I belonged in this profession." "You absolutely belong," Elijah assured her. "And the path will be a little easier for your generation because of what we're doing here today." Later, as the event wound down, Elijah found himself alone with Marcus Taylor, the flight attendant whose support had been crucial during both the incident and its aftermath. "How's the new position treating you?" Elijah asked. "It's challenging," Marcus admitted. "Implementing these new protocols means confronting a lot of resistance to change. But every time I train a new crew, I tell them Richard Bennett's story. It makes the abstract concrete, shows them exactly what's at stake." "That's the power of testimony," Elijah agreed. "It's why Catherine and Thomas have been so committed to sharing their experience, painful as it is." As they spoke, Elijah noticed a group of airline executives across the room, including several who had initially been defensive about the incident. Now they were engaged in animated conversation with Catherine Bennett and Dr. Simone Carter from the National Medical Association. 6 months ago, those executives were hiding behind corporate statements and legal teams, Marcus observed. Now they're actively seeking solutions. "It's remarkable what can happen when we move beyond blame to constructive action," Elijah replied. The following morning, Elijah prepared to board a flight back to Baltimore. As he approached the gate, he noticed several flight attendants whispering and glancing in his direction. For a moment, he felt a familiar tension, the hyper-awareness that came from being recognized, judged, or questioned because of his race. But as he presented his boarding pass, the lead flight attendant smiled warmly. Dr. Washington, it's an honor to have you on our flight today. I attended your session on emergency response protocols yesterday. It was enlightening. Thank you, Elijah replied, pleasantly surprised. We've implemented all the new procedures on this aircraft, she continued. And I want you to know that your experience has changed how many of us approach our responsibilities. As Elijah settled into his seat, he reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The tragedy that had occurred on Flight 2187 could never be undone. Richard Bennett's life could not be restored. Yet from that devastating failure had emerged a powerful catalyst for change, a transformation that would ultimately save many lives and create more equitable conditions for both medical professionals and the patients they served. His phone chimed with a text message from Catherine Bennett, "Safe travels, Elijah. Richard would be so proud of what you've accomplished in his name." Elijah smiled, thinking of the journal entry Richard had written on the day of his death, "Less judgment, more listening." In many ways, that simple aspiration had become the guiding principle of the Bennett Initiative, and perhaps a prescription for healing the deeper divisions within society itself. As the plane lifted into the sky, Elijah felt a sense of purpose and peace that had eluded him since that fateful day 6 months earlier. The work ahead was substantial, the challenges significant. But for the first time, he truly believed that Richard Bennett's death had not been in vain. That from tragedy had come transformation, and from loss, a lasting legacy. Dr. Washington's story reveals the deadly consequences of racial bias in healthcare settings. When professionals are judged by their appearance rather than their qualifications, patients suffer. This tragedy demonstrates how systemic racism operates, not always through overt hatred, but through subtle assumptions, hesitations, and differential treatment that can cost lives. The transformation of this incident into a catalyst for change shows the power of turning pain into purpose. By partnering with the Bennett family, Dr. Washington created systemic solutions rather than simply seeking personal vindication. His approach teaches us that meaningful change requires both accountability for wrongdoing and constructive action to prevent future harm. Perhaps most poignant is Richard Bennett's own journey, a man working to overcome his prejudices whose life was ultimately cut short by someone else's bias. This irony reminds us that racism harms everyone, including those who may harbor biases themselves. It underscores the universal stake we all have in creating a more equitable society. The story ultimately affirms that one person standing firm in their truth can ignite widespread transformation, especially when they respond to injustice with dignity, determination, and a commitment to healing. What aspects of this story resonated most with you? Have you witnessed or experienced racial bias in medical settings? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to support more content that addresses these critical social issues. Don't forget to share with friends and family who might benefit from this powerful message about standing against discrimination. Thank you for joining us on this journey toward understanding and equality in healthcare. Remember, your voice matters in creating the change we need to see in the world.